Okay, so something just happened that almost no one saw coming. The Middle East just took a wild turn. For the first time in, over 40 years, we're seeing direct diplomatic contact between Israel and Lebanon. And we're not just talking about a truce, we're talking about a potential peace deal. It all went down in one crazy 24-hour period, and today we are going to unpack exactly how it happened, why there's so much more going on beneath the surface, and what this could mean for, well, pretty much everyone.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the announcement itself, which, came out of nowhere. Then we'll get to the real prize, the actual strategic target of all this diplomacy, Iran. After that, we got to talk about the 4 huge risks that could make this whole thing just fall apart. But then we'll look at a really surprising piece of history that shows how it might actually work. We'll unpack the secret diplomatic phrase that could be the key to the whole thing. And then finally, I'll tell you exactly what you need to keep an eye on in the next critical few hours.
All right, first up, the ceasefire that seemed to just materialize out of thin air. You got to remember, for 50 straight days, a really brutal war had been raging. And then, poof, silence? Let's just walk through the timeline, because it's pretty incredible.
So on April 16th, we get the announcement, a 10-day ceasefire. By the next morning, the sounds of war in Beirut are replaced by celebratory gunfire, a pause in a war that had already claimed over 2,000 lives. But just a few hours later, that's when the real shoe dropped. Iran announces that the Strait of Hormuz, this critical choke point for global oil that they'd closed back in March, costing the world $1 billion a day, was suddenly open for business. And right then, everyone knew this wasn't just about a ceasefire. This was a signal for something way, way bigger.
Right, so this is the most important thing to understand. This was never really about stopping the fighting in Lebanon. That was the key for sure, but it was the key designed to unlock a much bigger door, a massive negotiation with Iran. And to get why, you really have to put yourself inside Tehran and see how they see the world.
For nearly half a century, Iran's whole political identity, its legitimacy, has been built around this one idea, the axis of resistance. Now, this isn't just some casual military alliance. It's their core ideology. Iran positions itself as the protector of this entire network, fighting against American and Israeli influence. And their crown jewel, their most important partner in this whole thing, it's Hezbollah in Lebanon.
And that right there created this impossible trap for Iran. I mean, can you imagine the government in Tehran turning to Hezbollah and saying, hey, so we cut our own deal with the Americans. You're on your own. Good luck. It would be seen as this epic, historic betrayal. They'd be abandoning the very movement they claim to lead. There is simply no way any government in Tehran could politically survive that. It was a complete non-starter.
This is where the ceasefire becomes just this masterstroke of diplomacy. It's a textbook example of something called two-level game theory. Now, that sounds academic, but it's actually super simple. It just means that leaders are always playing 2 games at once, one with the foreign country and one with their own people back home. A deal only works if it's a win on both levels. By forcing a pause in Lebanon, the U.S. gave the Pragmatists in Iran the political cover they desperately needed. They could now go to their own hardliners and say, see, we demanded a ceasefire and we got it. This is a win. Now we can talk from a position of strength. It completely flipped the script for them internally. But look, just because you've unlocked a door doesn't mean the whole house isn't about to collapse. So now we have to talk about the 4 massive structural problems that make this entire agreement, well, incredibly shaky.
Yeah, this is not a solid peace agreement. It's more like a temporary, unspoken agreement to chill out for a bit. And it is riddled with weaknesses. As we're about to see, there are 4 really specific problems baked right into this thing that could cause it all to just shatter. Let's go through them one by one.
Okay, problem number 1, and this is a biggie. Hezbollah, the single most powerful military in Lebanon, never actually signed the deal. The agreement was between the governments of Israel and Lebanon. Hezbollah is not the government. They've been crystal clear. They have not agreed to disarm, and they will retaliate against any Israeli attack. They're watching this thing with caution and vigilance, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement.
Problem number 2. Israel's prime minister didn't exactly jump at this deal. Apparently, he agreed to it on the phone with Trump before he even told his own security cabinet. They found out from the news. His far-right coalition partners absolutely hate this deal. They want to see Hezbollah completely destroyed. As one Israeli diplomat just flat out said, Trump forced Netanyahu into this. So this peace is basically being held together by constant American arm twisting, not by any kind of consensus in Israel. And this right here lays the whole contradiction bare. It's kind of wild when you see it side by side.
Both sides have agreed to a ceasefire, while also formally reserving the right to break the ceasefire. Israel says it's staying in southern Lebanon and will act against any imminent threat, a term they conveniently get to define for themselves. Meanwhile, Hezbollah says any Israeli military action is a violation. This isn't an agreement to stop fighting so much as an agreement on the excuses they can use to start fighting again.
And that brings us to problems 3 and 4. Number 3 is that imminent threat loophole. The fine print basically gives Israel a green light to launch preemptive strikes. And number 4, and this is critical, these two deals are chained together. Iran only opened the Strait of Hormuz for the duration of the ceasefire. So if the Lebanon deal falls apart, the strait slams shut. If the Iran talks fail, the whole reason for keeping the peace in Lebanon just vanishes. They rise or fall together.
So given all that, this thing seems totally doomed, right? Well, maybe not. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because fragile, messy, contradictory deals just like this have worked before. And history gives us this amazing blueprint from all the way back in 1973.
The parallels here are just uncanny. It's really remarkable. In '73, you had a proxy war, Egypt and Syria, backed by the Soviet Union, fighting Israel, backed by the US. The two superpowers forced a ceasefire because neither of them wanted to get dragged into a direct war with the other. And that shaky ceasefire? It eventually paved the way for the historic Camp David Accords. Fast forward to today, you have a proxy war, Hezbollah and Israel, with their patrons, Iran and the US, trying to avoid a direct conflict. The hope is that this ceasefire can do the same thing, open up a path to diplomacy that seemed completely impossible just a few weeks ago. This finally brings us to the potential deal with Iran itself, and this wonderfully strange phrase that might just be the secret sauce to make it all work. It really comes down to the diplomatic art of being intentionally vague.
So in that announcement on April 16th, Trump used this very peculiar phrase, nuclear dust. He said Iran agreed to give back the nuclear dust from the underground facilities that American bombers hit. Now, on its face, it sounds weird, right? But from a diplomatic perspective, it is pure genius.
Here's why that phrase is so clever. Nuclear dust lets both leaders go home and tell a victory story to their own people. The U.S. can say, mission accomplished. We blew up their nuclear program and now we're taking out the radioactive waste as proof. At the exact same time, Iran can say, this isn't a surrender. We are simply cooperating on an environmental cleanup to protect our citizens from contamination. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and neither side has to admit the other one is right.
And that's honestly the secret to so much of this high-stakes diplomacy. It's not about forcing the other guy to admit they lost. It's about finding what they call productive ambiguity, a phrase so perfectly vague that both sides can spin it as the win they need to survive politically. This nuclear dust formula might just be the thing that makes an impossible deal possible.
Okay, so let's tie all these threads together. We've got a fragile ceasefire that unlocked a path to a huge deal, and it's all potentially held together by this one brilliantly ambiguous phrase. So, what does this all mean for right now?
Well, the ceasefire has completely changed the math here. Before this, the odds of a US-Iran deal were maybe 35%. Now, with the Lebanon problem off the table and this nuclear dust idea floating around, that probability has jumped to 50%. It's still a coin flip, absolutely, but it is the best chance for a deal we have seen since this whole crisis started. The risk of a total collapse is still a very real 20%, thanks to all those cracks we just talked about.
All right, so if you take one thing away from all this, let it be this. The next 48 hours are absolutely critical. Don't listen to the speeches. Don't read the press releases. Watch what happens on the ground. Does Israel launch a strike against an imminent threat? Does Hezbollah fire rockets back? And most importantly, do we start to hear the phrase nuclear dust pop up in the official talks? Those are the signs that will tell us if this fragile peace is actually going to hold.
So here we are, a 50-50 shot at a truly historic deal. The whole thing is incredibly delicate, balanced on a forced ceasefire and a couple of cleverly chosen words. The big question now is whether the fragile art of ambiguity can actually be strong enough to build a bridge over decades and decades of pure hostility. We're about to find out.